This child says in the ad, something got broken here, and we need to fix it. And so it's kind of stunning in its abstraction, right? That it wasn't corporate greed, it wasn't the failure of banks, it wasn't banks, hoodwinking, the working people. Just something got broken, right? So it absolutely abstracts the crisis out of any kind of individual blame or institutional blame or state blame, and says something got broken, and then immediately says, but we need to fix it, and then invokes the language of the frontier. People say that there are no more frontiers, but there are frontiers all around us, right? That's what the voiceover says. So it uses the economic crisis as another frontier to kind of recast or rebrand the crisis.
People think there aren't frontiers anymore. They can't see how frontiers are all around us.
They capitalize on this post-crisis wasteland chic, right? And fear and anger on the part of citizens, but then also offer a recuperative message. The trick is that the recuperative message is directed at the individual worker, not at anywhere else, not at institutional revolt or institutional reform, not at state reform, but the individual. It's up to the individual. It's very clear in these ads that that's what they're saying.
I got a question for you. What does this city know about luxury? Huh? What does a town that's been to hell and back know about the finer things in life? Well, I'll tell you. More than most. You see, it's the hottest fires that make the hardest steel.
I saw the Chrysler Super Bowl ad when I was watching the Super Bowl. And it's an ad that is an homage to Detroit. It uses the hip-hop singer Eminem and his song Lose Yourself. And the ad just was absolutely about rebranding, really three things. Rebranding the city of Detroit, rebranding the brand of Chrysler itself, which was one of the big three automobile companies, one of the first companies to ask for federal bailout money from the US government, and rebranding capitalism.
This is the Motor City, and this is what we do.
The YouTube video right now has 12 million views. It's cynical and it's hypocritical. It's not only that they've spent $9 million on this ad after asking for $15 billion in bailout money, but also the automobile industries in Detroit in general have discouraged diversification of the economy there, which is one reason why, when they crashed, no one had a job.
Why is it so successful?
It's about kind of a simpler time. It's about, it's rebranding capitalism as, the thing it used to be, right? In this nostalgic frame, and saying this is what we have to do now.
Come, my tan-faced children. Follow well in order. Get your weapons ready. Have you your pistols? Have you your sharp-edged axes, pioneers, oh pioneers? We debouch upon a newer, mightier world, varied world. Fresh and strong the world we seize. Pioneers, oh pioneers.
The stage is set for very serious confrontation, but not necessarily, actually, I would say not a violent confrontation, because people have understood one thing. Politics today is played out in the minds of the people through through the media. This is the critical thing. And the one thing that delegitimizes any action is violence. That's why governments always try to provoke violence. My point is that Europe is in a process of social turmoil that is going to be increasingly radicalized in the coming few years, months and years. In this process, if there's no development of hopeful movements, it will be a development of hatred movements. And therefore, the confrontation between the culture of hope and the culture of destructive nostalgia is probably the most important trend in the aftermath of the crisis.
This idea that this is not a crisis, this is a trick. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. On the trick part, it is a crisis. It is a crisis in economic terms, but the crisis, in fact, has been used to improve the power and the profits of the financial groups, which are, in fact, the leading elite in our society. All the major banks and financial institutions in the last years have reported extraordinary profits. But now the governments are in a fiscal crisis. The government need the money, and the banks say, well, in order to be stable, in order to not to go back into our trouble, we cannot lend it to you. And in fact, the only way we are going to lend something to someone if you start cutting wages, firing workers, curtailing social rights, and eliminating the collective bargaining power of the unions. So in that sense, the trick part of the statement seems to be empirically supported, because profits are hugely up. Some of the Spanish banks have reported the largest profits in history in 2010. And at the same time, the condition had been created for an assault on the welfare state, on social rights, on labor union power, and in fact on all the institutions that were constructing people's life in terms of their basic needs. So if it is, I don't think it's necessarily a conspiracy of the capitalist class to organize this, but ultimately it's being used in those terms. So in the perception of people, this is obviously a trick.
I argue that economic globalization has progressed with tremendous speed, but politics and the media have remained primarily national. So we have this kind of global capital, and then we have national and international organizations that are trying to respond to this crisis caused by the movement of capital globally. I think the trust is in question, and people distrust these organizations. They see very clearly that these organizations are unable to solve the crisis. And politicians and governments offer national solutions to global problems, and people can see that. And what people can remember is something that is connected to nationalism. Even if they distrust national organizations, they do recognize what nationalism is. And politicians are very clever. They play with the concept of nationalism, and so do journalists. So when there is a global crisis, how it is being framed by the media is that there is one nation-state against the other. Greeks are being labeled lazy by Finns who think they are better, and it's always somebody else's fault. It's not, it's not our fault, it's your fault. And the rhetoric, I think, is really nasty at the moment. Always blame the other, always blame the one who is not like us. And I think this is why nationalism is so popular. And it's interesting that nationalism is so popular even if national institutions are not.
Hyvät ystävät, tuli iso jytky! On tehty poliittista historiaa, hyvät ystävät. Te olette olleet tekemässä sitä. Tämä on yhteisen työn tulos. Meitä kohtaa nyt uudet haasteet. Me olemme valmiita. Me olemme nousseet pienestä, ilman suurta rahaa, suurella sydämellä, suurella työllä. Kaikkia tarvitaan, jokainen pääsee mukaan. Perussuomalainen Suomi on isänmaallinen, oikeudenmukainen. Tämä puolue on perussuomalaisten, naisten ja miesten puolue.
The question is really that the organizations are behind, both national and international organizations, and they are trying to solve these issues that are so complicated, and people feel lost. And perhaps they go back to communities, perhaps they go back to their own localities, perhaps they establish their own communities, perhaps they exchange their views on the internet or use social media because they feel that there is no organization that represents their interests at the moment. So I'm a bit pessimistic here.
Però tots estem amoïnats i indignats pel panorama polític, econòmic i social que veiem al nostre voltant, per la corrupció dels polítics, empresaris, banquers, per la indefensió del ciutadà ras.
For millions of people in Europe and North America, the economic crisis that unfolded since 2008 has shaken the foundations of their lives. Suddenly, employment became uncertain. Credit was restricted to a few. Consumption reduced to the essentials. Social services deeply cut. And a dark cloud engulfed the future of their children, reversing the pattern of higher expectations for the next generation.
So what happened in Spain as a response to the crisis?
Well, the most important thing that has happened is this movement of the indignants that is a spontaneous movement that started on the internet by calling people to demonstrate 1 week before the municipal elections as a protest against the emptiness of the electoral debates in the municipal campaign, in which parties, both conservatives and socialists, but almost all other parties as well, were just talking about their old problems, about themselves. They were blaming each other for the crisis, no one proposing solutions, and always trying to find slogans to capture the vote without really providing any serious alternative, and not actually self-criticizing the failed policies of the past.